Right, everybody, we're going to make a start on the next session. Well done for making it back. I believe there's definitely coffee. I believe there were. In fact, I can see a biscuit going past me. There were biscuits. Sorry, you nearly dropped that. Sorry. So I'm glad about that. Otherwise, you would have all had words with me. Right. So we're on to our next keynote session now. And I'm really pleased to have Mike Brewer, who is the Interim Chief Executive of the Resolution Foundation, who do some brilliant work about the economy and public services and employment and skills more generally. So again, Mike's going to give a keynote address, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion afterwards. So please welcome Mike to the stage.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thanks for coming back after your coffee break. Until about 7 or 8 weeks ago, I was in charge of the research team at Resolution Foundation, and then 1, thanks to Rishi Sunak calling the general election, and 2, thanks to my previous boss deciding, in his words, he wanted to change the charts rather than just draw them. I'm now the Interim Chief Executive at the Foundation. And if you haven't heard of us, we are a think tank that strives to increase living standards for low to middle income households, and our theory of change is to achieve change by drawing charts in Excel. So we're going to get a few of those now, but don't worry, there's no test at the end. What I thought I would do is reflect for a little bit about the labour market context that you all find yourselves in, the new government finds themselves in, and then talk a little bit about what Labour might do, which of course is not based on any inside information, it's based just on what they said in the manifesto. And I know several of us are thinking, like, will all their manifesto actually become a program for action? But there's at the moment, there's no reason to doubt them. So I'll just talk a bit about what we saw in the manifesto and what that might mean. And I wanted to particularly talk about what their reforms affecting labour market rights and the world of work. We've not heard too much about that so far today, but I do think that's incredibly important for you guys in the room, as well as for the government's new growth agenda. And I'll explain a bit about that later on. So, in terms of where we are, I mean, of course, some of you may know this, but this chart just shows the rate of employment, the rate of unemployment, and the rate of economic inactivity. And the familiar story is that during the 2010s, Britain was in a jobs boom. That employment rate went up considerably during the 2010s. Then the pandemic came along. The pandemic caused a big hit in employment and a little bit of a spike in unemployment. When the pandemic went away, that unemployment spike also went away, but employment's not recovered because of the right-hand chart, because of economic inactivity continuing to go up. Right, and as a result, we're one of the few developed countries where the employment rate has not yet got back to its pre-pandemic level, right, and it's all because of that rising inactivity rate for people who are not in the labour market because they say they don't want to work right now. But let's not forget, though, that the 2010s were a boom time for employment. Right? We had a 6 percentage point rise in employment rate during the 2010s. Comparable, indeed, better than some of the booms we've had, in previous boom times. Obviously, Labour will be hoping that they can do that again, and we'll say a bit more about that in a few slides' time. So that rise, you say, the 2010 record of the UK was very impressive. Since after the financial crisis, we saw a sizable rise in employment rates. I mean, there are some this is looking internationally. I mean, there are some countries on the left-hand side of the chart whose economic circumstances just transformed dramatically in 2010. So, particularly in the Central and Eastern European countries. So that's not the right comparison. But compared to the Western and Northern European countries, we did very well in the 2010s. That's our employment rate going up by 6 percentage points amongst working age adults. But as I say, since the pandemic came along, the record has been really not very good at all. So we've seen our employment rate fall back since the pandemic hit, and that, as I say, we're one of only 6 OECD countries, and one of few of the countries we would normally compare ourselves to, Western and Northern European countries, where the employment rate is still below pre-pandemic levels. So that's the challenge. Things were great. Pandemic came along. Inactivity went up. Now the labour market is looking a little less good. What about wages? Well, there was a question at the back in the previous session which stole my punchline. I mean, wages, real terms wages have not really changed in the last 15 years. Been on a bit of a roller coaster, of course, during that 15 years. So what we're showing here is wages in real terms, so having adjusted for inflation, so average earnings in real terms, having adjusted for inflation. And the roller coaster since 2010 has been that initial pay squeeze at the start of the 2010s. Then real wages finally started rising. Real wages did weird things in COVID because of furlough distorting the statistics and so on. And then the cost of living crisis has come along. And although very recently real nominal wages are growing rapidly, they haven't grown as fast as inflation over the cost of living crisis. And so the end result is sort of 12, 13 years where real wages have hardly changed. I mean, that's one of the just defining features of what we called Stagnation Nation. That was the kind of subtitle to the report we put out last year on how we can get shared growth back. The glimmer of good news, though, in wages is what's happened to low pay. And largely because of George Osborne, remember him, Chancellor a while ago, in his introduction of the national living wage, that we've seen a substantial fall in the proportion of people who are on low hourly pay. And this is an absolutely remarkable transformation, right? And as a result, inequality in hourly pay is the lowest it's ever been, which is really quite remarkable. Now, that's not yet turned into a reduction in inequality in overall incomes, but it's a substantial change in what the bottom end of the labour market looks like, at least when it comes to hourly pay. So that's the context very briefly. And now, as I flagged, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Labour's proposed reforms to the labour market rights and broader labour market institutions. And this is what we saw in their manifesto and also in their accompanying document. They have proposed a series of day one rights. Of course, they have promised consultation fairly rapidly on what exactly day one rights, and there will undoubtedly be a fight between unions and employers about how probation periods can factor into that. But certainly a substantial improvement in workers' rights to things like unfair dismissal. They have said they will strengthen and increase statutory sick pay, that people will have a right to a contract that reflects their hours worked. So if they're currently on a 0 hours or a flexible contract and they end up working a fixed pattern, they'll have a right to have a contract reflecting that. They propose there could be compensation for shift cancellations if they are done at the last minute. And then even more radically, they've talked about sector-wide agreements where employers, the government, and unions get together to talk about things like pay, conditions, and training. And they've proposed, very sensibly, starting with the social care sector, which is a sector that suffers from very, very poor pay and conditions, but also is one where the public sector is heavily involved already, so it might be easy to get change quickly. And then giving workers all these rights is no good if they can't enforce them or can't afford to enforce them. And so Labour have proposed what the previous government proposed, but then didn't get around to implementing, which is a single enforcement body. So we at Resolution Foundation are really thrilled to see this. That's not just because it's echoing some of the recommendations we'd made a year ago, but these will make could make a really big difference to the way that many millions of low-paid people experience work. Okay, and let's just not, we've seen the videos at the start where people were talking about the transformational impact that going into work has had, but we also know that some people are in jobs that are not transformational for their well-being because they face insecurity and poor conditions. So strengthening rights for workers can be a big help for some people in low-paid and low-skilled jobs. But I think it's also important for you people in the room, because as one of the questions in the previous session said, we can't really expect people to move into work if the financial appeal for work is not there. But I would also say we can't expect people to move into work if also the other parts of the job are also not there. So again, if you're facing the prospect of a rubbish job with insecurity over your hours worked, no sick pay, and so on, you're going to be less likely to want to go into work at all. So in the jargon, all of these reforms, if implemented, should increase people's willingness to work. It should increase effective labor supply. It might make your jobs easier. And I think it will also help contribute towards the government's overall growth agenda. So something we showed in our work last year was that the amount of labour market dynamism and churn was really low at the moment. So we like to think that the UK has a flexible, dynamic economy and labour market. It has a flexible labour market in the sense that, but it doesn't have a dynamic labour market. So people don't change jobs as often as they used to. And changing jobs is one of the ways in which people get pay rises, so it's really important for them. But it's also one of the ways that we get overall productivity up. We get people to move to the job that suits them most. It means that productive firms can expand and unproductive firms close. So dynamism and churn and sort of it is a good thing. And giving workers some sense, some reassurance that if they move to a new job, it might not turn out as bad as you feared, might help that sense of dynamism. Now, to make that real, although I said I spend most of my time sitting in front of charts, I did get to sit in some work we did a couple of years ago, talking to low-paid workers. Actually, it was in the West Midlands region as well. We were talking to young men who were working fewer than 30 hours a week. It was part of a project trying to understand why people don't work full-time. And overwhelmingly with these young men, the main answer was, well, the jobs are pretty rubbish, so I don't actually want to work 40 hours a week, because that's 40 hours a week doing something rubbish. I'd rather work 25 hours a week doing something rubbish and have 15 hours a week doing something fun at home, right, even without the money. But the second reason was the one about this perceived insecurity. So particularly as a person who was in a 0 hours contract job, who was getting fairly reliably 20, 25 hours of work a week. And and he said he wanted full-time work. Well, why don't you go and get a different job? Well, because all the other jobs are also 0 hours contracts, and there I've got no idea how many hours I'll get. Whereas in my current job, it's like better the devil you know. I'm probably going to get 20, 25 hours a week. I know my manager. I can negotiate something. So just giving work, and you can see his rationale made perfect sense. So the idea is that if we give workers a bit more security, improve their rights a bit more compared to their employers, we might get people more willing to move into low-paid work and more willing to move around, to change jobs, increase productivity. So I say it could be a big deal. It could be great for workers, it could be great for getting employment up, and it could actually help the government's overall growth agenda. That's all based, of course, on what they said in the manifesto. It was all fairly high-level stuff. There were tons of details to sort out. Sorry, the left-hand bit is just giving some numbers on the scale of the importance of this. So 1.1 million people could get statutory sick pay for the first time. You currently don't get statutory sick pay if you earn less than £120 a week, so we're excluding many part-time workers. 1.7 million care workers could be affected by that sector-wide agreement. And we think there are 7.2 million workers who are currently facing uncertainty over their hours of work. So the scale is huge here, right? But of course, there are risks involved, and we know that there are some employers who won't like this. And it's and if implemented, this would be the biggest change to workers' rights we've ever seen, probably bigger than the minimum wage in the late 1990s. So the government definitely needs to get it right. Back when the minimum wage was introduced in 1999, the Labour government at the time explicitly took let's be cautious, let's go slow, we'll set the rate low, we'll have the consultation with employers and unions through the Low Pay Commission, and we'll just make sure we're not doing anything too dramatic to the labour market, and then we'll put it up later, which is what they did in the 2000s, and then George Osborne's living wage in the 2010s. So I really hope that this government also has the bold vision, but also it will need to move slowly, it will need to bring employers on. What are the risks? I mean, we can look internationally to sort of see whether there are risks. So this is another chart where we're looking at different countries. I'm sorry if you don't know your three-letter codes for various countries. I'm not sure I know all of them either. But what we're showing here is some data on how does the rate of unemployment on the vertical axis relate to the ease of dismissing individuals. So this is people at the OECD have tried to classify the rules and regulations that exist in each country and think about how easy it is to dismiss people. And in the UK, it's fairly easy to dismiss people. Obviously, until they have their their right to complain for unfair dismissal. It's extremely easy to dismiss people in the UK, right? But in other countries, those rules are tougher. So right now we're towards the kind of lax end, and obviously if Labour's proposals to give people day one rights came into force, we would move towards the right, more into that pack of countries. Now, this is not an economic piece of analysis, but the good news is that it doesn't seem to be a very strong relationship between the ease of firing people and the overall level of unemployment. Right? You might think that if employers can't fire people, they would be less willing to hire people. It doesn't seem to be reflected in the overall rate of unemployment. Where there's a slight worry is if we look at the kind of that turnover issue I was just talking about. So this is the annual hiring rates, like in a given year, how many workers are in a new job. And there does seem to be a relationship between the hiring rate and the ease of firing people. And it's in the direction you think. So the overall rate of employment, the overall rate of unemployment might not be any higher in countries where it's harder to fire people, but there is some sense in which there's a little bit less churn going on. Now, of course, again, this is not an ironclad rule. This is what happens when you just look internationally at other countries, and you can see that for any given level of the ease of dismissing people on the horizontal axis, there's a wide range of unemployment levels on the vertical axis, and obviously the UK can try to make sure that it's one of the countries that keeps its low unemployment whilst giving workers a bit more rights. Okay, I want to say a little bit about skills where I'm highly conscious that there are people in the room who are more expert than I am, but there was an important and broadly sensible set of skills pledges made in the manifesto and in the accompanying documents, and again, we definitely here need to wait and see what the government will actually do. But Stephen's already talked about not just the rising number of NEETs, but also the falling number of young people doing apprenticeships, as apprenticeships are getting skewed towards older people and people who already have the qualifications. And so it was good to see Labour saying things that are indicating it wants to shift the funding back towards younger people. There's an ambition for Job Centre Plus to do more than it's doing now, so combining it with the National Career Service, and as a recognition that for young people in particular, the issue is not just low employment but also poor mental health, and we heard that in the previous panel. The idea to create Young Futures hubs. So much detail yet to be announced, but I think that there's definitely some things that we should all welcome in that. And then my final slide was about what the previous panel was talking about, and I think we've heard this largely. So the 80% target, and of course, the one reason Labour are doing this is because of their relentless focus on growth, which is all you get the Chancellor talking about nowadays. And obviously, to get more growth in the UK, we will need more investment. But they have also identified that the other way to growth and higher living standards is to get employment up. So they've set a very challenging target. On this chart, I've repeated the employment rate over the past 15 years. And then the green line is sort of what would happen if we carried on increasing the employment rate at the same rate as we did in the 2010s. So if things were as good as they were in the 2010s, then we'll get to 80%, but not until 2032. Is it orange? The orange line at the bottom, though, is what the government's own economic forecaster thinks is going to happen. And they think the employment rate over the next few years, assuming Labour didn't do any of its policies, so it's a forecast from a few months ago, they forecast the employment rate would not change at all. But that's a dramatic difference from what we've seen over the 2010s. And that is primarily driven by their assessment of the demographics that are coming our way and the increasing amount of ill health in the population. So there's a little bit of population aging going on within the working age population, but mostly it's due to their assessment of how ill health will hold down the employment rate. And so compared to that forecast, you can really see the ambition implied by Labour's desire to get 80% within a parliament. If it's going to happen, it's going to need really dramatic interventions on the groups where we think employment can go up, which will probably be amongst parents with dependent children, where there's still scope to get employment rates up, amongst young people and NEETs, and we've heard reference about that already, and among people who have a disability and or health issues, and where that will require interventions to get their health better, as well as interventions to get those people with long-standing disabilities into sustainable work. But there's definitely, we should applaud the ambition, but we should all recognise this is an extremely challenging target. So I think I'll leave it there, Stephen. So the 2010s were a boom time for employment. We had a very strong labour market, maybe less so with wages. The pandemic and cost of living crisis have really put a stop to that, and we can see now that the UK is now back in one of the kind of problem states, looking internationally, where employment is languishing. If Labour does everything in its manifesto, then we are about to see the biggest change in workers' rights in at least a generation. And then behind all that is that very challenging 80% target. Sorry for all the excess detail you don't need to read there. So we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
I'm going against it here. That's it here? Yep.
Right. Thank you for that. I think delivering change by Excel is something I can get behind. If it might just be me and you, to be honest. We've got plenty of time for questions. I'm going to take Chair's prerogative to ask the first one, but after that we're going to open it up. We've got plenty of time, so let's see lots of hands, please. So I want to talk about better work and good work, which was referenced in the first session, as you said. One of the fears when George Osborne, who's a popular podcast host for those that don't know, it's a very good podcast actually, and as well as previously being Chancellor. One of the concerns when he was raising the minimum wage so much was this might cost jobs. Doesn't look like that happened, so you need to look at the counterfactual, of course. The flip side was some people hoped, well, if we raise the minimum wage, this will mean that people are costing employers more, and they'll therefore find out ways to be more productive and tackle the productivity gap that we've got. That definitely hasn't happened. So would you, and in fact, employers in some ways maybe found different ways to keep their labour costs low through, insecure work, that sort of stuff. So to what extent would you say that some of the measures Labour's proposed to raise labour standards, does that give us more chance of unlocking some of those productivity benefits, or will employers find different ways to sort of keep their costs lower, or what more do we need to do to get productivity up? Nice, easy one to start.
Well, let me start with the first bit of that, which is, I mean, you're pressing me on might there be risks in a plan to strengthen workers' rights, and yes, there definitely are risks, and I touched on that in my talk. But yes, also the current debate, or at least what you hear from some business leaders, some industry groups in private, does sound a bit like what the debate was like in the 1990s when the government was proposing a minimum wage, so you were getting the scare stories. This will be terrible for our business, and so on and so on. And the minimum wage experience proves that well, yes, it's a shock to your business, but the business in general will cope. So we don't see that there aren't any negative employment effects of the minimum wage so far, according to the 25 years of this being monitored by the Low Pay Commission, because businesses adapted. Now, yes, you are right. One way in which they adapted might have been to lean into the insecure work, the flexible work, so employer-sided flexibility. And yes, these reforms might choke that off. But if that does happen, then I'm optimistic that this will be what we need, that jolts some of the low productivity firms to up their game. And if you step back and if you're somebody thinking about, well, how do we get productivity up overall? If giving workers more rights puts out of business a few firms that are not particularly productive and only surviving because they're exploiting their workers, and in return allows more productive, better paying businesses to thrive, then overall that is going to make us more productive. So sometimes it's not actually about making a particular employer more productive. Sometimes it's about the kind of hard logic of making some firms' business practice unviable because they're relying too much either on low-paid labour or sweating that labour through insecure work. But is this Is this the only thing that the government's going to rely on to get productivity up? No, not at all. I mean, this is a minor contribution. Then I'm sure the Chancellor will be talking all about the need to get investment up, and that's right. But this can play a small part too. And I definitely want people to realise that, although it might just sound like something Labour is doing to make life better for some of its voters and low-paid workers, it isn't. I think it is an integral part of their growth strategy.
Fabulous. Thank you, Mike. Right. Let's open it up for some questions. Who's got a question that they would like to ask? So we've got one at the front here and one in the middle. So we'll take those two together, please. And if you can introduce yourself in advance of asking your question, please.
Thanks so much. Robert Craig from the Skills Builder Partnership. Thanks for your presentation. I would be fascinated to understand your views on, particularly on the literature and the reality of returns to skills, and what we can expect to see if we invest in skills in terms of productivity and growth.
Yeah. Fabulous, thank you. And second question here.
Hi, Guy Venables from Maximus. The question I've got is around the 80% unemployment level that's the ambition. Heard a bit of information about the Labour manifesto and what we might want to see as a result. But as I understand it, there's multiple countries that are already at that 80%, and I'd be very interested in either policy changes that have led to that, or any kind of labour market demographic information that might have led to that position.
Okay.
Great. Good question. Mike.
Yes. I don't think we've heard. Yeah, I think skills will also definitely be part of the government strategy for growth, and it's really good to see in what it has said before the election. It's clear that it is focusing on the below higher education, whether that be colleges, apprenticeships, and level 4, level 3 skills. And yeah, we definitely know that there are strong economic returns to those qualifications as well as degrees. So some of the previous government's policies were moving that direction too. The lifelong learning entitlement was definitely a good step. But yeah, we showed in some of our big work last year that there are can be very large returns to level 3 and level 4 qualifications, and particularly in some of the sectors that the UK will probably need to rely on for growth. So that might include some of the kind of high-tech net zero sectors, or in professional services, financial services. So in these growing sectors, which the UK will definitely need to rely on, there are particularly high returns to below degree level qualifications. So I think skills will be very important. And thank you. And then what can we learn from other countries? On the policies, I don't know, but I think what we can learn from other countries is broadly what I said in my talk, which is that tells us the 3 areas that the government will need to focus on are in parents with dependent children. So there are some countries that definitely achieve higher employment rates amongst parents, particularly mothers, and that will be in part, but not exclusively, not just about childcare. So I don't want to say childcare is the silver bullet here. The parents, and in young people, where different countries can have completely different institutional setups for how we think about young people, and I think we're particularly sort of unsupportive of some young people. It's like, you education up to 18, then that's it, off you go, you're on your own in the labour market. Hard to get a second chance, and so on. And other countries just take a completely different approach to easing people through that transition and giving them multiple second chances. And the third one I highlighted was people with ill health and disability, where I think there the circumstances can vary so much between other countries. But so yes, you're absolutely right. There are things we can learn from other countries, but any action will have to be concentrated in those 3 demographic areas.
And just to add one thing, which allows me to shoehorn in a fact that I failed to mention in the previous panel but meant to, which is that so our research shows that only 1 in 10 out-of-work disabled people get employment support each year, but 2 in 10 say they want to work. So there's a massive employment support gap there, and one of the challenges is that the employment support system is set up mostly to focus on people who are on the job centres books and traditionally unemployed, and we need to widen it out to those other groups and have more of an open door policy, which you do see a little bit more in some other countries, as well as joining up. Like having 7 million people on an NHS waiting list probably doesn't help massively, but it's also about joining up that support as well. So we need to tackle that 1 in 10 getting support. That compares to 3 in 10 young people. So we need to do better for young people, but also we need to stop ignoring lots of people who are out of work who would say they want a job. Right, I've shoehorned that in now. Apologies for that.
No, that's a good fact. A good fact.
So we have a question at the back there, please. And is there any other hands? We can take a couple together. Yes, and one in the middle there. We'll take the two together.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It was really interesting. My name is Meg Price. I'm from Public First, a public policy consultancy. I was just wondering, we spoke a lot about kind of young people today and the employment support that they might get, but I wondered if you had any specific thoughts around kind of midlife and older people and the kind of economic impact of supporting them to kind of stay in work or kind of find their kind of like later stages of their career something new.
Thank you, good question. And we had one in the middle somewhere. Sorry. Oh, there you are. There's one in the middle there, please, as well. Have you got? Oh, so you've got a microphone. That's why the team are looking at me to say, "What are you talking about?"
Tracy Fishwick, Transform Lives Company. We're in Liverpool, and we work very much at a micro level with people. The people you were just mentioning there, really, Stephen. And so I was thinking about how, and agreeing with the Labour Party's commitments around strengthening employees' rights, great. But then on the flip side of that, the people that we are working with become even more of a risk to those employers, obviously, to want to take a chance on someone. And so the lack of transition support into employment is a massive issue, and deliberate policies or strategies around that, like allowing people to keep their benefits for a period of time, as they move into employment. Things like Future Jobs Fund, so subsidising jobs in order to make people more attractive to that employer, to give that person a chance. And in-work support, that we can provide. So most of those people are ineligible for all of our support in the sector because the funding doesn't allow us. So there's that whole package or strategy, and I just think we've just been lacking a strategy generally. There's like one programme after another. Just thoughts about that really, and what kind of things would you choose to do to intervene?
Great, thanks Tracy. So yeah, a sort of point there about what I describe as a sort of galaxy of acronyms with riddle me this eligibility criteria, and how we help those who need the most help, and then also a question about evidence and support for people sort of around midlife and older, as well as the young people.
Thank you. On the first, I don't really know the answer, I'm afraid. So we may. And I was going to say to Stephen earlier, I suspect people who know the answer to this question are in the audience, not at the front right now. So I don't know the answer to that on the evidence on how best to help people at midlife. But on the second question, so you touch on some of the risks of giving workers these rights, which is that employers might be less willing to take a chance on some potential workers, and maybe that's some of the kind of people, include some of the kind of people you work with. And what that comes down to, I think, is the very important consultation the government will surely do very soon on the probation period. So I said the Labour's talked about day one rights, but really what that comes down to is will it allow a probation period, and for how long? And at one extreme, if people got the right to unfair dismissal literally from day one, that would be a very big change, and I think that would be a serious impediment to employers taking a chance on somebody. So I suspect it will allow for some sort of probation period, during which you could, if someone turns up and they're a complete no hope, you can get rid of them. So I think that's the sort of safety valve. So I think there'll be a really close focus on the probation period and the exact wording used on that. But yes, you're also right. So in that the government will need to come up with an overall strategy. So it's not enough just to give the employee more rights when they get into work. I mean, I think that will make some people more willing and able to consider working. It reduces some of the insecurity and uncertainty about it. But yeah, they will also need support. And we talked earlier about how that needs to be joined up. I think we're hearing today from the government, again, a reiteration that it wants to see a lot of that devolve to local areas, so to people like the Mayor today and to the equivalents in other areas, and to local authorities in those areas that don't have combined authorities, which is definitely the right idea, because they're in a better position to do some of that joining up between agencies.
Great. I might just come back to Meg's question, because this is going to sound like it's a setup, but actually we do have 2 videos later on today, brief videos, which are case studies of pilots that we've been working with partners on about how we help people to switch careers, mid-career. So we've been doing some work on that. And we also been doing some work with Phoenix Insights around some of the evidence there as well. The other thing I'd mention is, so we did a report last year called All Change, which found that the average career changer faced a £3,300 per year drop in their earnings per year. And that's a big drop. You might also need to drop out of work altogether if you need to retrain, for example. And who's got the financial backing to do that? It's only a certain group within society. So I think there is something the government needs to do to de-risk some of that change for people. For example, we've argued the train and progress rules in universal credit that allow you to do full-time training up to 16 weeks. If the work coach agrees, that should be extended to a year if the work coach agrees. You know, if there's a good job there that people could go on to. Lots of other things as well, but I think that sort of de-risking point, and this is where employment and skills comes together, and this is where it's quite difficult to do at national level, but also hopefully some of the things the Mayor was talking about, give an example of how mayors across England and governments across the UK can do this as well. So it sounds like a plant. It definitely wasn't, but it's allowed me to say watch the videos later and more on this during the course of the day as well. I'm very conscious that we are the last thing between everyone in this room and lunch. And lunch definitely is there. I wasn't certain about the biscuits earlier, but I am certain about lunch. So I'm going to have to bring us to a close there. Your lunch is next door in the exhibition hall, so a good chance to go and talk to all the exhibitors there as well. There is also a housing zone learning lunch session just out the front there, out that door, with ABRI and communities that work from 12:45 to 1. So do drop along to that as well if you can. And after lunch, we're off to workshops, which should be in your programs, the details of each of those or where they are. There'll also be various learning and work staff who can help point you in the right direction as well. So lunch now, then on to workshops. Don't forget the exhibition and the Housing Zone Learning Lunch session as well at 12:45. And to finish us off, please say a massive thank you to Mike. Thank you.